Back in the 1950s, your grandfather's Victory Garden wasn't just about growing food. It was about growing the right food. Because, believe it or not, 20 common vegetables that filled American dinner tables were quietly being banned, restricted, or pushed out of gardens across the country. Today, we're digging into why these everyday crops became forbidden fruit, and some of the reasons might shock you. Number 20. Castor bean plants. Your grandmother could order castor bean seeds right from the Sears catalog in 1955, and many families grew these dramatic plants for their tropical look and natural pest control properties. The large, star-shaped leaves made beautiful garden backdrops. And farmers knew that planting castor beans around their vegetable plots would keep moles, gophers, and insects away naturally. Kids would collect the colorful speckled seeds to trade like marbles. But by the 1960s, the government discovered these innocent-looking seeds contained ricin, one of the most dangerous natural toxins on Earth. Just 3 seeds could seriously harm a child, and suddenly what had been a common garden plant became a potential weapon. Today, growing castor beans can land you on a federal watch list, and possessing the seeds without proper permits is a serious crime. The FBI actually monitors castor bean purchases because they're used to make biological weapons. Number 19. Jerusalem artichokes, sunchokes. During World War II, Victory Garden manuals actually recommended Jerusalem artichokes as the perfect wartime vegetable because they stored well underground and could feed a family through winter. These knobby tubers were so popular that seed companies couldn't keep up with demand. Families would plant them once and harvest for years, making them the ultimate Depression-era crop. But there was a problem nobody talked about in polite 1950s society. They earned the nickname fartachokes for good reason. The high inulin content caused such explosive digestive issues that dinner parties became social disasters. By 1960, gardening magazines quietly stopped recommending them, and seed catalogs dropped them entirely. What had been promoted as patriotic wartime food became too embarrassing for suburban families to admit they grew. Number 18. Pokeweed. Down south, pokeweed was considered poor man's spinach, and every farm family knew how to prepare it safely. Grandmothers would send children out in early spring to gather the tender young shoots, which were boiled 3 times to remove the toxins. It was such a tradition that entire communities held poke salad festivals, and the plant was featured in folk songs and family recipes passed down for generations. But as families moved from farms to suburbs, the knowledge of proper preparation was lost. By the late 1950s, emergency rooms were seeing children poisoned by eating the wrong parts of pokeweed plants. Agricultural extension offices launched campaigns warning that pokeweed was dangerous, and within a decade, what had been a cherished Southern tradition became a plant that parents taught their children to fear and destroy on sight. Number 17. Rhubarb. Every 1950s housewife had a rhubarb patch tucked behind the garage, and rhubarb pie was as American as apple pie. The tart stalks were perfect for desserts, and the massive elephant ear leaves made great natural umbrellas for children playing in the garden. Families would harvest rhubarb from the same patch for decades, and sharing rhubarb starts with neighbors was a common act of friendship. But then came the horror stories. Children started getting hospitalized after munching on those big, tempting leaves, not knowing they contained dangerous levels of oxalic acid. One case in Ohio made national news when 3 children nearly became seriously ill after using rhubarb leaves as lettuce in their pretend tea party. Garden clubs began removing rhubarb from their recommended plant lists, and many communities actually banned it from school gardens. Insurance companies started refusing to cover properties with rhubarb plants. Number 16. Wild leeks, ramps. Before they became trendy restaurant fare costing $20 a pound, ramps were just spring food for Appalachian families. Every hollow had its secret ramp patch, and families would gather them by the gunny sack for fresh eating and canning. The smell was so strong that schools in West Virginia would actually close during ramp season because children reeked so badly from eating them at home. But as word spread about these miracle onions, commercial harvesters moved in with devastating results. Entire mountainsides were stripped bare by people selling ramps to fancy restaurants in New York and Washington. By the 1980s, states started passing laws making ramp harvesting a felony on public land. Today, getting caught with a bag of ramps can result in a $5,000 fine and 6 months in jail. What had sustained mountain families for centuries became contraband overnight. Number 15. Lamb's quarters. This was the spinach of the Great Depression, growing wild in every garden and providing more nutrition than any store-bought green. Farm wives would send children out to gather lamb's quarters for dinner, knowing it contained more protein, calcium, and iron than expensive vegetables they couldn't afford. It grew everywhere, required no care, and could feed a family for free. But the post-war prosperity of the 1950s made eating weeds seem shameful and old-fashioned. Chemical companies launched massive advertising campaigns convincing homeowners that lamb's quarters were ugly weeds that needed to be eliminated. Suburban wives, desperate to fit in with their neighbors, began spraying herbicides to destroy what their mothers had considered a blessing. Within a decade, one of America's most nutritious wild vegetables was rebranded as a pest. Number 14. Dandelion greens. Your great-grandmother harvested dandelion greens every spring, knowing they were packed with more vitamins than any store-bought lettuce. Italian and German immigrants brought dandelion recipes to America, and by the 1940s, you could actually buy dandelion seeds in garden catalogs. Families would cultivate special patches of dandelions, blanching them under boards to make them less bitter. But the 1950s suburban lawn culture declared total war on dandelions. The chemical industry convinced Americans that a perfect lawn was more important than free food, and 2,4-D herbicide became the weapon of choice. Eating dandelions became embarrassing, a sign you were too poor to buy real vegetables. Today, the same dandelion greens that cost $8 a pound at Whole Foods are still being poisoned out of American yards by people who don't know what they're destroying. Number 13. Purslane. Mexican and Mediterranean immigrants knew purslane as verdolaga, a succulent vegetable packed with more omega-3 fatty acids than fish. During the 1940s, nutrition experts actually recommended purslane as a superfood for pregnant women and growing children. It grew wild in every garden, required no water, and could be harvested continuously all summer long. But purslane's sprawling growth habit made it look messy to 1950s suburban sensibilities. Garden magazines began calling it pigweed and recommending herbicides to eliminate it. Chemical companies spent millions convincing homeowners that this nutritional powerhouse was an ugly weed. Today, the same purslane that health food stores sell for $12 a pound is still being sprayed with poison by people who have no idea they're destroying one of nature's most perfect foods. Number 12. Wild garlic. Before supermarkets, wild garlic was essential seasoning that grew free in woodlands and meadows across America. Farm families would gather it in spring when the leaves were tender, braiding the bulbs for winter storage just like their European ancestors. During the Depression, wild garlic often meant the difference between flavorful meals and bland survival food. But post-war suburbanization destroyed most wild garlic habitat, and what remained became off-limits. Property developers eliminated the woodlands where it grew, while remaining patches were declared protected areas where gathering became illegal. Modern liability laws made landowners afraid to let people forage, even for plants their grandparents had gathered freely. Today, wild garlic that once fed entire communities is mostly gone, replaced by expensive store-bought alternatives. Number 11. Stinging nettles. European immigrants brought knowledge of stinging nettles to America, where they became a prized spring tonic. Farm wives would gather them with gloves and long sleeves, knowing that cooking eliminated the sting and revealed a vegetable more nutritious than spinach. Nettle soup was considered essential medicine for thinning the blood after a long winter of preserved foods. But suburban living had no patience for a vegetable that could hurt you before you cooked it. Parents didn't want children accidentally brushing against nettles in manicured yards, and the plant's aggressive spreading habit made it unsuitable for neat suburban gardens. As wild foraging knowledge faded and supermarket vegetables became the norm, nettles transitioned from medicine to menace. Today, most Americans would call the Poison Control Center if they touched a nettle. Number 10. Ground cherries. These little golden fruits wrapped in papery husks were once as common as tomatoes in American gardens. Children would pop them like candy, and farm wives used them for pies, jams, and preserves. Seed catalogs featured multiple varieties, and ground cherries were considered essential for any well-stocked pantry. They stored for months without refrigeration, making them perfect for winter eating. But ground cherries belonged to the nightshade family, and 1950s health scares about nightshade toxicity cast suspicion on these innocent treats. Reports of stomach upset from eating unripe ground cherries, combined with general fear about anything related to deadly nightshade, led many gardeners to abandon them. The fact that they spread aggressively and looked weedy in neat suburban gardens sealed their fate. By 1960, most seed companies had dropped them entirely. Number 9. Wild asparagus. Escaped from old homesteads and abandoned farms, wild asparagus grew along every country road and fence line in rural America. Farm families would return to the same patches year after year, knowing exactly when the spears would emerge in spring. The wild varieties were often more flavorful than cultivated asparagus, and the patches produced for decades without any care. But modern roadside management changed everything. Highway departments began spraying herbicides to create clean roadsides, eliminating the wild asparagus that had fed rural families for generations. What wasn't poisoned was made illegal to harvest due to safety regulations and property rights. Today, gathering wild asparagus can result in trespassing charges, and most patches have been destroyed by chemical spraying or development. Number 8. Amaranth greens. During the Dust Bowl, amaranth was called pigweed, but it saved families from starvation. This hardy plant grew when nothing else would, producing nutritious leaves that contained more protein than most vegetables. Mexican-American families had always known amaranth as quelites, and they taught their neighbors how to prepare the leaves during the worst years of the Depression. But the 1950s agricultural revolution had no place for this primitive crop. As hybrid vegetables and commercial farming took over, amaranth was dismissed as weedy and unrefined. Government agricultural programs actively promoted modern crops over traditional ones, and amaranth gradually disappeared from seed catalogs. Extension agents actually taught farmers to eliminate amaranth as a weed, not recognizing it as the nutritional powerhouse that had sustained civilizations for thousands of years. Number 7. Sea beans, glasswort. Coastal families from Maine to California gathered sea beans from salt marshes, prizing them for their crunchy texture and natural saltiness. These succulent vegetables were pickled for winter use or eaten fresh as a side dish. During World War II, when salt was rationed, Sea beans provided both nutrition and seasoning in one plant. Coastal restaurants featured them as a local delicacy. But the Clean Water Act of the 1970s made harvesting sea beans a federal crime in most areas. What seemed like environmental protection devastated coastal communities who had sustainably gathered these vegetables for generations. Today, collecting sea beans can result in federal charges carrying fines up to $25,000 per day. The same plant that coastal families had harvested for centuries became contraband overnight, while fancy restaurants now charge $30 for a small serving. Number 6. Wild onions. Before grocery stores, wild onions were essential flavoring that grew free in fields and pastures across America. Farm families would gather them in spring and fall, using every part of the plant for cooking and medicine. Children learned to identify wild onions as one of their first foraging skills, and the plants were so common that they were considered weeds by some farmers. But modern agriculture eliminated wild onions through intensive herbicide use. The few remaining populations are often on private land where gathering is prohibited or in areas contaminated by agricultural chemicals. Liability concerns make most landowners afraid to allow foraging, even for plants that once grew everywhere. Today, wild onions that provided free seasoning for generations have largely disappeared from the American landscape. Number 5. Plantain. This common weed was actually nature's first aid kit, used by generations of Americans to treat cuts, bee stings, and skin irritations. Farm children knew to chew plantain leaves and apply them to wounds, earning it the nickname white man's footprint because it grew wherever Europeans settled. The young leaves were also eaten fresh in salads or cooked like spinach. But plantain's humble appearance made it a target of 1950s lawn perfectionism. Chemical companies marketed herbicides specifically to eliminate plantain, convincing homeowners that this useful plant was an ugly weed. The rise of modern medicine made people forget plantain's healing properties, and soon families were paying for expensive first aid supplies while poisoning the free medicine growing in their yards. Number 4. Wild mint. Spearmint, peppermint, and other wild mints grew freely along streams and in moist areas, providing natural flavoring and digestive medicine for rural families. Farm wives would gather mint for teas, cooking, and treating stomach problems. The plants spread naturally, creating renewable patches that could supply entire communities with fresh mint for decades. But water pollution and habitat destruction eliminated most wild mint populations. Industrial runoff and agricultural chemicals contaminated the clean water sources these plants needed to survive. The few remaining patches are often in protected wetlands where gathering is illegal or in areas where the plants have absorbed pollutants that make them unsafe to eat. What was once free medicine became either contraband or contaminated. Number 3. Violet leaves. Violet leaves were once a common addition to spring salads, prized for their high vitamin C content and mild flavor. Children would gather them for their mothers, who knew that violet leaves contained more vitamin C than oranges. The heart-shaped leaves were perfect for adding nutrition to meals when fresh vegetables were expensive or unavailable. But the 1950s brought new concerns about eating anything that wasn't clearly identified as a commercial crop. The similarity between violet leaves and other plants led to safety warnings from health departments, even though violets had been safely eaten for centuries. Suburban lawn care began targeting violets as weeds that disrupted perfect grass carpets, and chemical treatments gradually eliminated them from most yards where children had once gathered them freely. Number 2. Wood sorrel. This lemony little plant with heart-shaped leaves was nature's candy for children who would nibble its sour stems during summer play. Farm families used wood sorrel in salads and soups, appreciating its tangy flavor and high vitamin C content. The plant grew wild in shaded areas and required no cultivation, making it a valuable free food source. But wood sorrel contains oxalic acid, and 1950s health campaigns warned about the dangers of eating anything containing oxalates. The plant's clover-like appearance also made it easy to confuse with other plants, leading to safety concerns among parents. As suburban yards became more manicured and parents became more cautious, wood sorrel was increasingly treated as a weed rather than food. Today, most people would call poison control if their child ate wood sorrel. Number 1. Watercress. Watercress was once considered the champagne of wild vegetables, gathered from clean springs and streams by families who prized its peppery bite and exceptional nutritional value. It was so prized that fancy restaurants would pay premium prices for fresh watercress, and many farm families supplemented their income by selling it. The plant grew year-round in spring-fed streams, providing fresh greens even in winter. But industrial pollution and agricultural runoff made most watercress unsafe to eat by the 1960s. Chemical contamination turned this prized vegetable into a potential hazard, and health departments began warning against gathering it from natural sources. The few remaining clean populations are now in protected areas where harvesting is strictly prohibited. What was once free gourmet food became contraband, while supermarkets now charge $4 for a tiny package of commercially grown watercress. These 20 vegetables tell the story of how America changed from a nation of self-sufficient gardeners to suburban consumers who forgot where food comes from. Government regulations, corporate interests, and suburban culture destroyed food sources that had sustained families for generations. Hit that subscribe button and check out our next video about the forgotten fruits that were banned in the 1950s. The reasons why will blow your mind.